Hi, everyone. This is Trish Kendall, your host for the Choose and Become interview series. So today I have with me Morgan Motsinger. Morgan, just say hi super quick.
Hey, everybody.
Because everybody knows, I'm going to take a step back before we move forward. But first and foremost, Morgan's joining me this morning on a Monday, Pacific Coast time. So the first thing that we talked about this morning when we jumped on is her little ones are still sleeping. Mine are running around doing whatever it is they're doing. And at some point, hopefully in this conversation, we will be interrupted by our loved ones because that's what we embrace. Morgan, just for those people who are new to the show, I'm just going to set some context and then we're going to get right into it. I made 5 critical choices on my journey from the pit of despair to the peak of success, enduring success, what I consider enduring success. And those 5 critical choices I reflect on often. I speak about them, I teach on them, I reflect on them. And what I have found through the years is that I find inspiration from people like you. And I like to pull lessons and experiences and wisdom from those people who I admire and put it in the framework of these 5 critical choices so that my community and my audience can get different perspectives and hear different voices. So Morgan and I connected really only a few months ago, and we'll probably get into that a little bit, but right away I was like, oh my gosh, I need more of you. I want to read more of you. I want to listen to more of you. I want to have more conversations with you. So let's get started. Morgan is the host of the podcast series, P.S. We Expire. And Morgan, will you just share a little bit about yourself for my community, please?
Sure. Even just the title of the podcast is a great kind of introduction to who I am. When I thought of that title for the podcast, it made me laugh so much. And I can feel myself giggling anytime someone mentions it because it's this idea of okay, if we're talking about life, we're talking about all the things that make us successful. We're talking about what we're doing in the world and what our life is like. And it's like at the end, there's this little tagline that's like, hey, by the way, don't forget about your own mortality, and so often we shy away from talking about these hard, big, existentially crisis-driven conversations about death and our own mortality, when instead, if we will boldly look at that, it can have a really clarifying effect on our purpose, on the things that we find important, on how we choose to spend our time, on how we choose to define success. And so my whole shtick is how do we embrace our mortality in a way that helps us bring so much clarity and purpose and meaning into our lives now? What does it mean to live fully? And I believe that we do that by looking at our own mortality. So that's me. I talk about death a lot. And I'm a speaker. I'm a podcast host. I'm currently a full-time student. Well, not right this second because it's summertime, but I'm an undergrad.
Summertime, but
summertime. Yeah. I'm an undergrad student. And the older I get, the less sure I am of what I want to be when I grow up. So that's an introduction to me.
And continuous learning. But will you say a little bit more about your studies? Because this is one of the things that right away I was like, oh my gosh, it's almost like the yin to my yang. So will you just tell a little bit more about what you're studying and why?
Sure. So I am studying psychology and neuroscience. I'm really fascinated in why our brains do what they do. I was introduced to kind of like a model which would fit in the cognitive behavioral therapy realm several years ago when I was really, really struggling with grief, and I was really struggling with anxiety and panic attacks for the first time in my life. And I was like, I need some tools here. This is really awful. Mm-hmm. And when I talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of that is reframing your thoughts and understanding how if we can choose different thoughts, we can have different feelings that arise and we can behave differently. So, and I love that model very much. But what I started to get interested in, the questions I started asking was, why am I thinking these things in the first place? Like these thoughts that are coming up, who put those there? Why do I think those? Was I born with those? Did that come as a result of how I was raised? How exactly can I choose the thoughts that seem to come up automatically? What's the step behind that? And that got me really interested in some of these deeper, brain structures and neuroscience and some of the modalities that have come up as a result of this this really kind of untapped scientific frontier of psychology, because so much has been trial and error, just tested out on the outside. And now that we're having so many medical technologies come online, like fMRI machines and EEGs and brain scans, we're starting to understand what's happening in the brain more, and I find that endlessly fascinating. So that's what I'm working on right now, without a clear goal as to what I'm going to do with my education. But I just figure,
when you grow up,
right, what I'm going to be when I grow up. But the beautiful thing about all of this is that the more I get to know myself, the more that I peel back the layers of the social conditioning, of the things that everybody else told me I was supposed to be, to really find Morgan, and even the me beneath the name, beneath any of the labels, who is that, the more I trust my intuition and the feelings of, oh yeah, this is right where I'm supposed to be. I trust those more and more. And so stepping into the realm of pursuing this degree in my education feels like, oh yeah, like stepping into the flow of the river. And that feels really good.
And that's a journey. It's
for sure.
I mean, what I hear, it's not even about the destination. It's the journey that you're going through. And I appreciate it from the very beginning. And we will get into these choices here in a minute, I promise. I really appreciate when you and I are in conversation, and sometimes I'll share something about my childhood or share something about trauma or an action or something I did. And the overlay that you put on that through your questions, and the overlay that you put around human behavior and the science behind why this little girl or this young woman or this woman has made the choices that she's made, I find fascinating, informative, and I want more of it. So I appreciate your journey, because just knowing you puts me on that journey too.
I love that. One of the things that has been so helpful to me in understanding the science behind things is, it's like this beautiful permission slip to view all the choices that I've made through a lens of compassion. Because there was a lot of shame and guilt around some of the things, like my anxiety, that I didn't feel like I had control over. And I was like, what is wrong with me that I'm still dealing with this? And understanding how much of our history and our environment and our brain structure and all of these things contribute to doing the things the way that we do. It's like there's so much relief there, not because it negates the personal responsibility, but it just adds some more context to be like, oh, okay, this makes perfect sense why I would do this, because of how I was raised and because, all of these different factors. It just was like this beautiful lens of compassion that I really needed when I was struggling really badly.
Are you okay if I take that further?
Yes.
So when we first met, you were actually giving me and some of my colleagues some advice around podcasting. Like, that is really how we met. And because you've been doing this for a while, it's whatever, blah, blah, blah. And you show up with such joy and love and compassion, and you're a really great listener, by the way, and your listening thing. And at the end of our session together, we went around and we each provided one thing that we felt joy about, or it was something. I can't remember what question it was. Nick asked the question, and it was just one thing that is bringing us joy. And I said, the relationship that I have with my 14-year-old daughter, and that it brings me so much joy. And I saw your face light up. and the love and understanding and compassion that went with that. Then I did more Morgan research, and I learned, which you share, more about your family and the grief that you went through. Will you please share that? And I think that will give a little bit of context to what you're talking about with grief, the connection I feel for you, and a completely as a whatever. And then we'll keep going with the choices.
Sure. The reason why my face lit up when you said your 14-year-old daughter is because my daughter Annie was 14 when she passed away. And what I found so interesting, I loved the email that you sent to me afterwards, where I can't remember the exact wording, but it felt like this connection of understanding of how precious that mother-daughter relationship is, especially in the teens. Mm-hmm. Annie, while I didn't have to navigate a lot of the typical like teenage behavior because she had special needs and she developmentally was not a teenager in her cognitive abilities. She was more like a 1 or 2 year old, completely dependent on us for all of her care. But the profound privilege of being her mother is undoubtedly the reason why I am the way that I am and who I am now in relation to, who I was before I laid this little squirming baby on my chest for the first time. Yep. So the journey through these mountains and valleys of grief and anxiety, most of it revolved around the uncertainty around her life because of her medical diagnosis.
And then overlay your desire to learn more about why you were feeling the way you were feeling and through that journey. So thank you for just trusting me to put that here with us.
Yeah.
And now, Emma and Luke. Mm-hmm. So I think Emma's still sleeping right now and Luke's playing his keyboard. So how old's Emma and how old's Luke?
They are now 13 and 8.
So as we think about enduring success, lasting success, and I know everybody has their own definition of success. When you think about enduring success, what does that mean to you? Creating enduring success.
It means that I make the most money I can. No, I'm just kidding.
So anti-you.
Enduring success to me means that every day I get to participate in activities that help the people that I love know that I love them, and that I participate in activities and habits and routines that help me love myself more. I feel like on my deathbed, if I can get there with, maybe some things that were left undone, but minimal regrets, because I know that every day I was as present as possible. I was as kind as possible to everyone who came across my path. I would consider that to be a great success.
Yes. And I might pull some of that even more as we keep going, especially when you think about the habitual part of the choices you make. So the first critical choice that I made on my journey was to pick up the phone when my sister called. And that was a profound choice. And what I learned through making that is enduring success begins with making a first choice. Nobody can choose for us. And for me, because I made that choice, I actually earned a chance to change. Now, I've since made other first choices that weren't so profound. They were more practical. When you reflect on your journey to enduring success and the way that you defined it, is there a first choice that you know really has impacted where you're at today?
What comes to mind isn't the choice as much as it is the recognition that I had one. So I remember this was several years before Annie passed away. And in the throes of caregiving, and so I'll give a little backstory with Annie.
Yeah,
She had
please,
a
please, please.
she when she was 3 years old, we got the diagnosis of MPS type 3A, which is a rare genetic disorder that essentially it's a storage disease. So our cells are usually really, really good at recycling waste. They get rid of stuff, and you've got these little tiny organelles in your cells that are called why am I blanking on the name? It doesn't matter. But basically, like the garbage, they're the garbage men. They take all the waste out of the cells. And she's missing an enzyme that helps those organelles function properly. So all this buildup is happening in her cells all the time. And so what that results in is neurological and physical decline over time, degeneration over time. So she was talking, walking, running, eating, so much running, normal toddler. And we went we went and got her tonsils and adenoids out because she had terrible sleep apnea when she was 3. Terrible sleep apnea. And the ear, nose, and throat doctor that performed the surgery very astutely observed that she perhaps had some other intellectual things going on that we weren't aware of yet. And I was so offended. I was like, my perfect 3-year-old child, like, how dare you tell me that there's something wrong with her? But that kind of just like stuck in the back of my mind, like, okay, maybe we could do some additional testing. And she just was behind in her speech, but nothing that wasn't explainable still.
Yeah.
And through a little bit of it was very serendipitous that we went and saw a geneticist and did some blood work. And that's when the testing came back as with the Sanfilippo disorder. So over time, she peaked or plateaued in her skill development and then started to slowly lose her skills over time. So she stopped talking. Eventually she got a feeding tube, eventually was stumbling around and was then crawling again, and then was completely immobile.
Oh my God, Morgan.
And then a lot of, additional things that would come with someone who, an older person who has Alzheimer's. So the forgetfulness, the lack of eye contact, she had trouble remembering how to swallow, all the stuff that comes with like bowel troubles, and all of these things are happening over this decade with her. So in the midst of this, I remember sitting in her bedroom and just being so angry and so broken, so sad that this was happening to her. And I was thinking, why her? And why me? I don't want this. I don't want to do this. This is terrible. This is awful. This sucks. This is the worst. All things that are true. And I had this light bulb moment where I was like, where what I was thinking was, this shouldn't be happening. And the light bulb moment was, but it is happening. And I don't know why that is, but that internal realization of when I was resisting, what is reality? When I realized it doesn't matter how much I resist it, it's still reality. So what can I do with that? It introduced this awareness that I really did have a choice of how to show up. I really did have a choice. If I wanted to stay there, I could have left. I could have had any number of things that would remove me from that situation. But in that moment, I realized I get to choose the value of the care and loving compassion from my daughter. I get to choose to continue to have to face this hard thing head on. I get to choose to continue to have conversations with her healthcare providers and fight with the insurance companies and, face all of these awful things that were happening to her. I got to choose that. And that was a pivotal moment for me. A pivotal moment where every time something hard comes up, I look for the choice and then I get to make it intentionally. And that is a powerful, powerful piece of awareness.
And you said what the thing that then was on my mind. Do you find, I think the answer is yes, that there are times in which you have to make that choice again.
Of
Recognize it's a
course.
choice.
Yes.
Right.
I had to choose it over and over and over again.
Yeah. In
Yep.
that situation, with that love of a mother, and then I'm sure in then other situations, it is the recognition that it's a choice. And
Yes.
at that moment when you were sitting with Annie on her bed and you had that recognition, did you feel a physical shift within you? Like, was there a shift that you felt and were cognizant of? And then it's like, okay.
I don't know. I have a sense that it wasn't that all of these pieces, understanding choice, didn't come together at that point, but it was definitely like the first
Yeah.
push at the top of the hill, where I was like, okay, here it comes. And it's just built since there over the last, 5 or 6 years. And you're absolutely
And
right.
that's
Like,
important.
yes,
Go
yes,
on.
it is. It is because I think it is less common for people to have this significant life shattering, life altering understanding and awareness, and from then on their life is totally different. No, for me it was this trickle of understanding and awareness of the ability to choose, and then like you said, it's like it wasn't just in that context of my care and my love for Annie. It trickled out into how I take care of myself, how I relate in my relationships. Like it covered
Yeah.
everything, but that happened over time for sure.
And I 100% relate to that in two ways. And then I have conversations with people around this. One, I relate to it because in fact, I experienced the same thing. I lay out these 5 choices. They're linear. For me, they were linear. For other people, it's not linear. But I mean, I made these 5 choices across a 25-year period, and I didn't even know I was like, it took major reflection which is my second point, is reflection. Reflecting on what did I do? Why did I do it? And then what happened? And so then can I make that choice again? Or maybe I don't want to make that choice again. But the whole idea of reflection. And I know that I believe that you practice meditation and mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I keep saying I'm going to get on your bandwagon with your next cohort. But I liken it, I think, to reflecting, which is we don't do it enough, I think, as humans. And reflecting on the choices that we've made and then the outcome of that, for me and for you, has helped to propel and help us on our journeys. And I hope that other people around me do that. I try to, teach that a little bit.
Yeah, certainly.
So the second critical choice that I made was to commit to a 2-way agreement. And again, I mean, this goes back to, I knew I was committing to this agreement with my sister. This time it was a near contractual agreement between me and my sister when she took me in. And I knew I was committed. I mean, I knew I was doing what she told me I had to do, but I didn't really quite understand that through committing to it, I could have not done the things, but through committing, I actually transformed my feelings from bitterness and obligation and duty to joy and desire. But I didn't realize that until I felt it. But now I think we all enter into 2-way agreements all the time, informally or formally. Is there a 2-way agreement that you've entered into that you have a perspective that you want to share on committing or even not committing to that agreement? And the impact it has on you?
Yeah, I have a couple that are coming to my mind, but one that may be most pertinent to this conversation and my story is the commitment that we have to ourselves. And it sounds weird to be like, this is a two-way commitment, but in the work that I've done in the last handful of years, there are a couple of tools that have helped me become aware of this kind of like this internal dance that we're doing all the time with ourselves, where we've got the part of us that's like, I'm going to get up and go to the gym. And the other part of us is like, no, you need a break. And this other part of us that's like, you're so lazy. Why can't you just get yourself to the gym? So we understand that in our inner world, in our inner dialogue, we've got all these different parts of ourselves that sometimes want the same things, sometimes don't want the same things. And sometimes they fight with each other or whatever. And it's not that we have like a disordered personality issue here. It's just that is the nature of being a human. So what I have come to understand is that particularly through the work of Richard Schwartz, who developed internal family systems, which is a really great model that people can investigate. His idea, based on so many clinical hours with patients, is that we all have this capital S self in us that can be the one that's in charge of all of these other little parts of ourselves, that we can be the compassionate, kind authority in ourselves and manage the rest of the internal family of parts. And what I appreciate about this model so much is that it's based on this idea that at our core, we are good, and that we want good things for ourselves. We want good things for others. At our core, we are love, that we are connected to love, that we are loving. And that all of these parts have learned their roles based on our life experiences. And that if we can govern all these little parts in ourselves with agreements, with compassion, with good listening and tender care, that's when we don't feel incongruent in ourselves, when we feel like what's happening on the outside is matching what's happening on the inside. That I'm moving forward in authenticity because I know that my house is in order on the inside. So this two-way agreement to me is like, it's a multi-way agreement inside myself to always treat myself with compassion and love. And so when I hear this internal dialogue come up, this internal narrative come up of, Morgan, you're such a loser, like, or why are you trying to do that? You can't do that. I talk to that part of myself with so much love, because that's the agreement I've made with myself. So this absolutely trickles into all of the two-way agreements that I have with everybody else in my life, because the compassion and the care and the understanding begins here.
With capital S.
Yes.
And your first line of the agreement to yourself is treat myself with compassion and love, I think, right?
Yes.
Compassion and love.
Yes.
So all other things almost don't even matter, because if you do that first and foremost, then I think everything else just ends up kind of playing out the way that it should.
Yes.
But so this is a practice though, right? I mean, again, it goes back to making the choices and it being an ongoing journey. So when you commit to the agreement to yourself and treat yourself with compassion and love, are there times where you have to check yourself and say, oh, I didn't commit there.
Of course. And it's largely a result of just moving through the world unconsciously. It's moving through the world like, I'm busy, I've got my things to do. I don't have time for self-reflection. I don't have time to slow down, all of those things. So when you were like, Morgan has the meditation, I don't have that. That's fine. It doesn't matter, because meditation is just one of many tools of developing deeper self-awareness and mindfulness. So meditation happens to be, I came to my meditation because I was like desperate for something to help with anxiety. And that just happened to be one of the tools that I was like, I'll just try this out. And turns out, like, I went to it, left, went to it, left, went to it, left. And I'm a pretty regular meditator now, but just because that is the tool that happened to work for me. Other people find it in many, many different ways. but they're all pointing to the same thing, that is that key critical component of, if I don't realize that I'm talking to myself like a jerk, then I can't address it and change it. So there has to be some level of reflection and awareness of what's happening in the inner world in order for us to do something different. It's kind of like people who are like, I'm on marriage number 7 and I can't understand why every guy that I marry has the same problems. Well, okay. Why don't you do some like inner digging around in there? And yes, journaling is a great self-awareness practice. So instead of continuing to perpetuate patterns, particularly ones that don't feel good in our lives, if we can slow down, introduce practices and habits of self-awareness, then we can start to change things like permanently.
And to me, I love this nugget, and the nugget applies in personal lives, professional lives, with your community. I mean, it just applies all the way around. So thank you for that. The third critical choice that I made was to build trust. Now, for me, I had to begin with building trust in myself. And at that point in my life, I had no trust in myself. And I also didn't trust others. I trusted my sister and her husband. And they trusted me. I had earned their trust finally. But I didn't trust myself outside of the construct and the safety that they had created for me. And so I went on a journey to build trust in myself. And what I learned is that if at least I did some little things, if I chunked it down and just did little things really good or really well, or if I just focused on the little things and it didn't seem so insurmountable, and I started to build up little bits and pieces of feeling like I could do this. When has there been a time where you've had to build trust in yourself? And then I'm probably going to expand our trust conversation a little bit, where you've had to build trust in yourself. And can you recall with your reflection some of the ways that you did it?
The most obvious way that this showed up is when I decided to start a business. So I was a stay-at-home mom for 8 years and had, my 3 kids. My youngest was 6 months old, and I was like, I'm going crazy. Like, I need something to do outside of my house. I need something that I can work on that's just for me, some type of creative outlet that nobody else can get their sticky fingers on. So I started this literally sticky fingers on. Yes. So I just had this idea. Like, I was pretty good at decorating, I thought, and I was like, I'll just try this like hobby decorating business. So I started a business, and every roadblock that I came to where I was like, oh gosh, this is like something I don't know how to do. What logo design? I don't know how to do. I don't know anything about logo design. I don't know anything about like branding. What does that even mean? Marketing. I don't know much about bookkeeping. I don't know much about how do I file my business name with the state, all that kind of stuff, creating social media accounts, and what happens if I get a client? Like, what about creating a contract or a proposal or invoicing? I don't know any of this stuff. And so as my business grew, I was figuring things out. Each thing I figured out was another chink in the trust armor for myself, where I was like, oh my gosh, look at what I was able to do. Like 5 months ago, I was Googling, how do I create a website? And now I've got this website that is, bringing customers to my business. So every little thing that I figured out made me more confident that I could figure out the next thing, which might be bigger. So since that, I've always kind of leaned towards things that I know is just outside of my comfort zone. Like, it's just, it's like when you're a kid and you're going upstairs and you're like, I wonder how many stairs I could do at once, and you're like stretching your leg way up there and you can maybe get a toe on that step. And, and the bigger you get, the further that reaches. And so I find myself constantly like pushing myself just to the edge of like, ooh, I feel really uncomfortable here, but I know that this is exactly how I continue to grow into the person that I want to be.
I love that. I love that picture. I have that picture now in my head. And I remember it with me being a kid or my kids being kids with the stare. So now keep going just for a minute, because now you've evolved and expanded even more from a business standpoint. You became, you created the podcast series, which is really incredible. I love it. I really, and that's not like whatever Joe, my husband, always says, like, don't say awesome or incredible or love. Like really get frivolous. But I do. Like I find myself getting sucked into your podcast. But anyways, so now, and you are a keynote speaker. You work with business groups. You're getting your degree. So now it's just like continued this business owner mindset that you just keep growing.
Yes. Yeah. So
you just keep learning.
When I started my little decorating business, I had no idea that 6 years later, it would be full blown interior design. I had a retail store. My husband and I had joined forces. He's a building contractor, and so I was doing whole home remodels, and we were working on new construction and these projects that I dreamed of when I was just starting out. And then I was asking myself this question of, is this something that I know for sure I want to do forever? And the answer was no. And if I hadn't had the previous 6 years of building up trust for myself, I would have probably ignored that for a long time. But understanding that, like that really, for whatever reason, the timing was right and the internal congruence was right for me to close those businesses and go back to school. So the side of things, the business side of things is, I'm not putting a ton of focus there right now, just because being a full-time student takes a lot, and having, kids home. So the business side of things, as far as like the speaking goes, that's my edge right now.
Yeah.
But the podcast I've been doing for over a year, and I love it so much. I love honing the skills of asking good questions, and the other part of it that, which is not so fun, is the habit of doing it. As much as I love hitting record and talking about things that I find important and talking with people I find interesting, the habit of it and having to do it even when I don't feel like it is actually a really important component to all of this.
It is. And building trust.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't cracked that nut yet.
Yeah, me either. And not in this area anyway. There are other areas like other areas.
The energy thing
are,
is tough for me when I feel depleted. And it's not that I don't want people to see me down or low energy. That's not it at all. Like I want people to see me in all of my whatever. It's that I actually don't have the energy. Like I just don't have it. But I've been working on that myself, trying to and you stick with the habit. I stick with the habit with interviewing people on the podcast series, because there's a flow and there's a process and a schedule. But when it's just me and I feel like I have to hold the episode, I'm like, oh my God, it feels so hard. Feels so hard. And you do it consistently, and you capture at least my attention and my interest, and I keep going with you. Okay, I'm going to keep us going. Before we leave trust, just a little bit here. I love to think about, how do people inspire your trust? So a lot of what I do is work with teams, and whether that's on a professional level or personal level, around inspiring the trust of others. And so how does somebody inspire Morgan's trust?
Like how do they engender me
to
trust them?
Yeah.
One of the ways is when they don't talk about themselves all the time. When someone is genuinely interested in growing and learning, like I heard this quote years ago that said, everything that you say, you already know. And that has really stuck with me because I've thought about, like, if I am committed to, if one of my values is being a lifelong learner, which it is, then that means that asking questions of people who know more than I do about, any particular things, I get to learn. So I'm going to take advantage of opportunities where people are willing to share with me their expertise or their stories, or how they've coped with really hard things in their lives. I'm going to use that as an opportunity to learn and grow and connect. So I don't think that I've been in the situation where I've been talking with someone and they have only asked questions and they've never offered up any like personal stories or connections there. And I have felt just as disconnected from that person as I do from the person
Yeah.
who never asks any questions. So finding the balance there of the give and the take, but really it's like when I encounter someone who has a willingness to be vulnerable and a willingness to hold space for my vulnerability, that's an immediate trust builder for sure.
It's awesome.
And when another big one for me is when someone does what they say they'll do. And if they can't get to it when they say that they would, they tell me, I promise I'm thinking about this. I know I said I would get it done at this time. I can't. I'm going to have it done by X amount. So it's not so much about the, you said no matter what, like your kid is sick, but I don't care. You better get this thing delivered to me. It's not that. It's more so this awareness of, I know what it is. It's someone who embraces their own personal responsibility. That engenders so much trust for sure.
I appreciate the way that you just, I'm going to use the word label. It's not label, but the way that you just labeled that or described that, because I can pull it, and I appreciate both of those things. What you were saying about the balance between asking questions and, asking questions and not sharing anything at all. The being vulnerable and creating a space for vulnerability, from my experience, has been, that's hard. It takes practice and it takes making the choice. And you make it every time we show up together, and when you are with your guests and when you're with other people. And so I think a lot of people can learn from you and from just experiencing you in different ways, because people might think you do it naturally, but I think you're a lifelong learner and that manifests. So thank you for that. The fourth critical choice that I made on my journey was to create community and belonging. And I was older. I was in my 30s when I was intentional about creating my first community and learning. I learned through the journey that belonging isn't an intellectual idea. It really requires action and reciprocity. It required me to want to belong and to do things to create this belonging. And it required other people to want me to belong with them. And so it's one of the things that I hold very dear to me, is a sense of community and expanding communities. So I want to unpack this just a little bit with you, maybe starting first with belonging. And then if we can spend a little more time, go into community. What does it feel like to not belong?
The only thing worse than going through something hard is to go through something hard and feel like you're totally alone. So not belonging or not feeling like you belong, I think, is one of the worst things that you can feel as a human. We are so innately wired for connection that we see so many of the dysfunctions in adulthood are a result of a lack of belonging when you're a child. And I don't think that I don't think that we could overemphasize how important it is to belong somewhere. And there's a real, we bump into a real problem in Western culture that is obsessed with this pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, this hyper independence that has turned us into people who feel like we have to say, I don't need anybody. I can do this myself. And we're very, that messaging is reinforced by our economy, by our politics, by our religions. It's all of that is reinforced there. And that is for sure the most damaging to the human psyche and soul, is to feel cut off from others. And that it's a good thing to be cut off from others. Yeah. It's extremely damaging and very, very painful. And it leads to epidemics of loneliness. So belonging is, I don't even remember what your question was, but I'm like a little bit on a soapbox here, how important it is to belong.
Mm-hmm. Have you, in times where, in moments where you have felt like you didn't belong, or in moments where you lacked the feeling of belonging, has there been a person that has done something in action, something you remember that at least in that moment, it made you feel like you belonged there?
Yeah, it's the people who I already had enough trust with that when I was in the midst of really deep emotion, I felt okay to contact them. So, and I'm not very good at this. Still, I struggle with this. That it will be like, in hindsight, then I'll call them afterwards and be like, I had a really hard time yesterday. But it's like, who are those people that, like, I remember I'd gone to a doctor's appointment with Annie. And I think it was just like a routine doctor's appointment. It wasn't a big deal. But every once in a while, it would just hit me, the severity of her disease. And we left the doctor's appointment, and instead of getting onto the highway to go home, I got on the freeway to go to my sister's house. She wasn't expecting me, and I texted her on the way, can I stop by your house right now? Yes. And as soon as she came out of her house, I hugged her and I sobbed. I just sobbed. And we just stood in her driveway and I cried. And I don't cry around people very often. I think more now. Like I might start crying right now, but not a real big like cry in person. And so that was like a very, not only because she was someone who has proven to me time and time again that she's there for me for the ups and downs. She's been there since Annie's diagnosis and before, obviously, because we're sisters. But that she was someone that I felt comfortable enough to, when I was at my most vulnerable and most like physically distraught, that she was someone that I could be with. So it's like I think it's a result of the trust being built in those small moments leading up to the times when you're like, okay, I know that I really could count on this person. And to have just a small group of people that I know for sure I could call in those moments is really, really important to me. I could be friends with a lot of people, but those core, just handful of people that I can call on.
And that leads me to even just thinking of community. Communities, I think, can be really small or really big, and in different aspects of our life. And you absolutely have created your communities that have been support systems, probably both ways, you supporting them supporting you. But just reflect a little bit more, just take me a little bit more in your journey around how important community has been, or the role community has played. Communities, I think about all these different communities that we have in our lives. So the role that community or different communities have played on your journey.
I think having the plural there with the communities is really important, because we, in the same way that like it really would be in my particular relationship with my husband, it would be problematic if I relied on him for every single thing. Like, I need to supplement that relationship, take the pressure off that relationship by having these other friendships that are really important to me. In the
Yeah.
same way of like, it can be really problematic if we're leaning into one community for all of our needs. So in that sense, I had built a community around support for Annie's diagnosis, like actual physical support for her needs revolving around the results of having MPS. And then there was a community, a smaller community of people who have walked the path that I've walked with Annie that I connected with. And then there were maybe a few people in that community who also, you know, fit into another community where we talked about things other than just her diagnoses, you know. So it's
Right.
this like
Right.
this ebb and flow between all these different communities. And I think that the more that we, if we are feeling lonely, if we feel like we don't belong, it's time to expand our communities, plural, and then we can find the people in there who come into the inner circle. I often think about this metaphor of a house. Okay, so all of us are a house, and there are some people that we do not let come in the front door, right? They come to the front door and usually they're selling something. And so we will talk to them in the threshold, but like we're not interested in having them come in. And frankly, they're not interested in coming in either. That's fine. That's where that relationship stays. Then we have some people who we invite into the formal living room. In the formal living room, everything is always put together. It's always clean. It's always like presentable. And that is where this relationship lives. It lives in the formal living room. And that's okay too. There are some relationships that's where that needs to exist. For many people, this is the only place that family members can visit. You know, some people who have a relationship with parents, but it can only exist in the formal living room. You're put together, I'm put together, good. We can have a Thanksgiving dinner, but that's fine. Some people you let into the kitchen, where you're in there, you're cooking up a storm, you're sweating, you're in process together, you're talking over food. This is that kind of relationship. Now, there are very few people, if any, who get to go into the basement with you. And the only way that you can invite people down into your basement is if you have been willing to go down there yourself. So if we want to talk about how do we belong, the first piece of that, where we're developing belonging in ourselves, is a critical piece. So if we're willing to, maybe with the help of a therapist, through these different tools of meditation, journaling, walking meditations, whatever, that we muster up the courage to maybe just the first time, just take that one first step, and as we get a little bit further down, we'd flip the light on, get to the bottom step. And then we start rummaging around in the boxes. We start pulling out the stuff that is a little bit scary, peeking into all the dark corners. This is essential to belonging. So we have to belong to ourselves first, and then figure out which people we trust enough to maybe take down to the basement with us. Maybe we just take stuff up from the basement to them and show it to them in the kitchen. That's fine. But I love that metaphor very, very much.
I love it. Thank you for that. The examples you use are so visual in my head, obviously, because you paint the picture. So I appreciate that one. And it leads me, a couple of the things that you said lead me to the fifth choice. If we could spend just a little bit more time, the fifth critical choice that I made was to embrace my boundless capacity to love. And I say that, and it's really about not love the emotion, but love the verb, the action, the giving love, and then the receiving love. And you have given examples all throughout this conversation where in my brain and in my heart, I go, oh, that's giving love. Oh, that's giving love. That's giving love. Whether it's asking questions or listening. And even what you were just saying about receiving, receiving what others want to give. So I might ask you to be repeating some things, and I think that's okay.
Yeah.
love the verb manifests in different ways for different people all the time in different situations. When we think about giving love or receiving it, how does that manifest for you, for Morgan? What are some examples in the way that that manifests?
This is an interesting one because I immediately think of my role as a mother. And the way that I used to believe was the best way to be a mom was to be a martyr mother, where it was sacrifice every single part of myself in service of my family.
Oh, the
And
5 myths to
the
motherhood.
5 myths of motherhood.
Which
For
myth was
sure.
this one?
I don't know. I don't know. But
I don't know.
it's
Anyways, okay, everybody,
you know,
you'll just have to go find it. Go on.
we have
Keep going.
this belief that love, that true love, is completely sacrificing yourself in service of the other, and that it's not. the I think it was Carl Jung that said, definitely not verbatim, this is going to be much more clunky than the way that he eloquently says it, but that the one of the most detrimental things to our children is the unlived life of a parent. And I've often thought about, like, what exactly is, in the context of being a mother, what exactly is my job here? And I think one of the most important parts of the job is to show my children how to discover who they really are and then live that to the fullest. It's to give them the skills to listen to that little inner voice that is, the older that they get, the more layered on it's going to be, and perhaps harder to hear. Can I give them tools now to build that self-trust, that self-love, so that they, come into adulthood equipped with the ability to listen to that inner guidance, or the guidance from God, or the guidance from universe or consciousness or whatever. Can I do that for them? And so when I think about what does it mean to give and receive love, I think it's that in all the interactions, that if I can do the best to remind people who they really are, that I can give them tools to build trust with themselves, to build trust and connection with other people. I think that's the most loving thing that I can do, is just to point people back to to themselves, that is love, that is capital L love, and to make choices that are operating more from that place than they are operating from a place of scarcity or fear or lack. If we can tap into our awareness of abundance, and not in like this woo-woo term abundance, like whatever, but it's more like that I am not, there's nothing in me that is depleted by giving love to others, that I'm not going to run out. It's like when you're a parent and you're thinking about having another child, and you're like, but how could I possibly, like, how could I love my next child? I love this one so much, and that's going to be the split, whatever. And you just realize that the more you give, the more it expands. The more your love expands, the more that you give it away. And it trickles into areas like, I don't know, being kind to people on the street. That's a choice, to spread love wherever you are, putting someone's cart away, putting your own cart away at the grocery store. It's all these little, like, micro choices, these micro choices that are not motivated by keeping score and making sure that I can prove to myself that I did 5 bad things yesterday, but I did 6 good things. It's not that at all. It's more like, how can I just live my life as an outpouring of the love and compassion I feel for myself? And this is the funny thing that I was surprised by, is that I was always taught, okay, so I was raised very religious. And not only was I taught from a young age that at my core I was bad, which has been, a real journey to try and unpack and recover the truth. But I also was told that, like, any good thing that I did was only because it was God doing it through me. And that and for anyone who happened to grow up in an environment where that was the messaging, you'll understand how profound it is to come to the realization that like, oh, I'm actually good, and the good that I do comes out of this good part in myself. And that I don't have to do these things, these acts of love don't have to come from a place of duty necessarily, but more just because it is who I am.
You encapsulate what I believe with my whole heart. Love is a choice. The micro choices of giving love. And there is no limit to our ability to give it and to receive it. And Morgan, it took me a very, very, very long time to realize that and then to embrace it. I listened to you and you so eloquently describe and illustrate so much of what I believe, but through different experience, different perspective, a different woman, a different mom. And I appreciate and I'm so grateful that you immediately chose to give me your love when we met. But I actually don't mean that. I want to pause there for a second. We were on video, and I know, and I'll wrap us up in a second. We were on video, and I am not the only one on that video that felt your choice to give love on that video. It was your eye contact. It was the questions you asked. It's the way you listened to every single person that spoke and provided context. And those are choices, and they're micro choices to give love. And we felt it. And I appreciate it. And I hope that I do more of what you do. And I hope those around me choose and understand and know that love begets love. The more you give, the more you got. Morgan, okay. I will tell everybody how to follow you. P.S. We expire. Morgan Motsinger, you are beautiful inside and out. Thank you so much for being with us today. Any last thing that you would like to say before I wrap us up?
I guess it would be an encouragement for people who feel maybe afraid to be seen in everything that they are. And that shows up in a lot of different ways where there's, a lack of confidence to try new things, or when you're talking with someone, you have a difficult time even listening to what they're saying because you're so worried about how you're going to come across or how you're going to be perceived or how you're going to look. So moving through life with a lack of confidence that ends up becoming a barrier to connection and greater life satisfaction and pursuing the things that will really fulfill you. I can't overemphasize enough the importance of learning how to not just love yourself, but be able to sit with yourself and all of that stuff and have that compassion for yourself trickle into all the little nooks and crannies of your own soul and psyche. Because the more calm you feel on the inside and the more compassion you have on the inside, the less concerned you are about coming across a certain way. Because it just, I'm not always the most loving person, but I think in general, I hope that's what people feel when they're around me, is the love kind of like oozing out of my pores, and embrace the hard things that come, because it's in those hard things that we learn these lessons the fastest and deepest. So I guess just an encouragement to slow down and take the time to do the inner work, because it will reap benefits in every single area of your life, even in areas of your life that don't seem to be connected. So that was a long-winded way to just say, just take care of yourselves, everybody. You're doing better than you think you are. You're doing a good job.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me for this episode of the Choose and Become interview series. Morgan and I will just continue our conversation offline without everybody else. I believe with my whole heart that we create enduring success and fuel the success of those around us when we choose to give love and to receive love in return. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Choose and Become interview series. To check out more episodes, go to www.trishkendall.com/podcast, or go to any of your favorite podcast channels, including YouTube, under Trish Kendall Speaks, and you'll find this interview and more. Choose and become.